Thanks for joining us, and welcome to OpenInfra Live, the Open Infrastructure Foundation's weekly hour-long interactive content series, sharing production cases, open source demos, industry conversations, and the latest updates from the global open infrastructure community. Today marks our 16th episode, and we have some great content coming up in the next few weeks, so we hope you can join us every Thursday at 14 UTC, streaming on YouTube. My name is Kendall Nelson, and I'll be your host for today. Since we're streaming live today, please feel free to drop questions into the comments section as you think of them, and we'll answer as many as we can. We can try to save some time at the end of the episode as well to cover anything that we don't get to throughout the show. Looking forward to hearing from you and all of your questions. Today we're joined by Dims and Bob from the Kubernetes Steering Committee and Jay and Ghanshyam from the OpenStack Technical Committee. So, without further ado, let's jump in. Now, I'm sure this is a topic that has come up probably more than once for all of you. Do any of you actually really think that Kubernetes is replacing OpenStack?
Yeah, that's a general perception or talks every time, I think, and especially like whether Kubernetes replace OpenStack or which one is better, right? So, and because they both technology solves the similar kind of problem, right? But they solve it in a different manner. So this is the very obvious question. And I think if we keep asking that, this will be good to have the more clarification. So if we see about the use cases of both, then we can maybe understand it very clearly. What are the mainly difference between these two technology and how they can be used. And even in a general software industry, if we see every company have their own solution for a specific problem, right? In Teleco, there are a lot of companies are there. So there is no such thing like single company, single solution can survive. So that's why in open source also, like OpenStack, which is an open infrastructure, open source, and Kubernetes as a container orchestration thing. So they both have their own different use case. And based on your customer requirement and your what company you want to deliver, you can use them separately, combinedly, and I'd like to give a little bit highlights of their combined use case. Maybe that will be more clear, like why they are not comparable or they are not replacing each other, but they are even complementary to each other. Like you can use Kubernetes on top of OpenStack, having OpenStack as cloud provider, or having Kubernetes cluster on Nova virtual machine or bare metal using Magnum. And if we know that OpenStack is complex in managing, deploying, or even upgrading, so Kubernetes can help us to solve those problems at some extent. So if Kubernetes can, you can use Kubernetes to deploy OpenStack, it make it easy for you. Or one example I think very clear is the control plane in OpenStack. There are a lot of services we run in control plane. Like if we combine everything in a single, there are no API, Cinder API, Neutron API. And even if I take example of single Nova case, you have no API, scheduler, conductor, proxy API, and database again. So it's complex, and especially when you upgrade, it's not an easy task. So if you divide those or you deploy those services via container using Kubernetes, it can make them managing it easily. So there are a lot of ways like we can use them together. And if we can use them together, this is obvious that they are not replacing to each other, right? So it's up to you, like how you want to make money out of both of them. So there are a lot of ways you can do.
Yeah. So obviously we kind of covered a little bit talking about running them together, but Dims, I know your team works on the SIG cloud provider in the Kubernetes community and also works on provider OpenStack?
Yeah, so I was the only one doing that, but yes. So the way I got started was I was mostly working in the OpenStack community, and we ended up starting Magnum, which was an opinionated way to run Kubernetes on top of OpenStack. And then slowly I drifted to the point where, like, how do we make these two work better together? And we took the opportunity when the cloud providers were moving to external cloud provider in Kubernetes, and then we started this project around cloud provider OpenStack, where we ended up thinking about like what is the best way to integrate these two projects together, and using the base services that is in OpenStack and exposing that to things running in Kubernetes. So over a period of time, I drifted all the way, and I'm mostly working on the Kubernetes side now. But this is true with so many different people. Like I've seen a lot of people who are straddling both ecosystems and dipping their toes one way or another. And there is many other projects that are happening around like bare metal and cluster API for OpenStack and things like that. So I don't see. I definitely agree with Ghanshyam that the projects are complementary, and how you put together for your own needs is basically different between compared to different companies or different people, different teams.
Yeah, awesome. Further proof they're not replacing each other. Dim or Jay or Bob, did you have anything to add before we move on?
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to add to that based on the experiences I'm seeing with my stakeholders and customers, is that OpenStack has been around for a while, and I will, full disclosure, not super experienced with Kubernetes yet. I'm one of those stragglers that's just coming up with the experience, but it seems to me that Kubernetes is very much focused on workload and where the work the workloads, getting them available, the places to run things, whereas OpenStack's maturity is in the infrastructure realm. The tools that we have, there's nothing else that does infrastructure management with bare metal and stuff like that. And that's really where it's not an either or, it's how do they work together? One really focusing on the infrastructure, managing it and making it available while you have the workload capabilities through Kubernetes. We also have to remember too, that this journey from the virtualization world to the container world has happened really fast, and a lot of our customers are still trying to catch up. So a lot of them can't have an either or environment. They still need those virtualized, traditional VMs to support their workloads while they migrate to containers. Yeah.
And you still need to run Kubernetes somewhere, and OpenStack is a viable option for that infrastructure that you need.
Exactly.
So hearing from users and operators in both the Kubernetes and OpenStack communities, what are some of the hardest parts of operating these systems or operating them together?
I think it's just out of the bat with like Kubernetes, it's just the sheer complexity of it. There's so many moving parts, so many knobs and tunables and things like that people have. They're just overwhelmed with a lot of the options. Yeah. And then it's like, I don't want to say it's by design, but it sort of is, because the entire point of Kubernetes is to be very pluggable, to work on, the variety of systems and everything. So all these little knobs and dials are sort of a requirement to enable that like vast amount of portability.
Yeah, to add on to what Bob was saying, you can always hear the Kubernetes folks saying it's a platform for building platforms. So the way we think about it is like, you don't try to use it out of the box, but in any of the companies, if you want to evaluate and use Kubernetes, then do the things, get started and customize it to how you are doing things, and like build things on top, which you can then provide to the internal audience. And that's where it becomes useful. And the other slightly different thing between OpenStack and Kubernetes is like, we love a lot of little clusters, right? Like OpenStack is more about like how big is your cluster, right? Like, and we like little clusters for doing different things, so you can have multi-tenancy that way instead of the other way. So there's a few differences like that.
Jay or Ghanshyam?
I mean, personally, the problems that we're trying to solve at Lenovo right now are the actually bringing the clusters up, getting these environments up, whether it's OpenStack or Kubernetes or what it is, bringing up the infrastructure and deploying those environments are the big challenges. And I'm, my selfish interest going forward is that hopefully as community together we'll work to ease the adoption into whatever type of cloud customers want to have.
Yeah, and one of the
we all have to get there somehow.
Yeah, in OpenStack, if you see, the upgrade is one of the thing we keep saying like is the most complex thing. But upgrade in OpenStack is one of the thing is we should be making it more easy or making it more manageable. I think upgrade is one thing.
Yeah, for the Kubernetes side, a lot of Kubernetes installations are on public clouds, so we kind of like have an easy way there because we can rely on the cloud providers doing the hard part. But for us, the issues will be around like how do you provide the same consistent experience across all the clouds, right? So our challenge is a little bit different. Bob, do you see that?
No, I would agree there. That's sort of like the big sell for Kubernetes is that it's sort of the universal abstraction. Doesn't matter if you're bare metal, you're in any one of the cloud providers. It is the same API for managing your workloads wherever they are.
Obviously, lots of challenges to overcome in both of our communities, and very, very similar ones in both as well. So what would be some like really useful additions to the current set of open source infrastructure that would help your users, OpenStack users of both software tools?
I'll say the very first thing, like as we talk about the issues operator are facing, like upgrading tool, if we have in our open infrastructure things that can make their life easy, because whenever we choose or like operator choose the system for their infrastructure, cloud or something, they do see all these complexity, right? One-time deployment, complexity managed thing is okay. But if they see, okay, there are a lot of challenge in upgrade things, and whenever there will be new feature or something, they will not be able to upgrade or keep up their system with those new features and all, that will be something they consider it at very first time. So I'd like to see if some of the upgrade solution we have in our open infrastructure, even it is integrated within the OpenStack or outside OpenStack or combined with any technology.
So a couple of things that is on our mind on the Kubernetes side is how do we do something similar to an LTS where we don't rush folks to move to newer versions all that frequently and give them skip level upgrades, right? Like so they can do it every year or every other year instead of like a death march of every 3 months, right? Then the other one is like how do we bring people along with us when we upgrade to newer versions of things, whether it is resources or different APIs or CRDs, like how do we get them to move to the newer versions? Like, for example, in 122, we are deprecating and removing. We had deprecated a bunch of APIs because GA APIs are out, but lots of people in the field are still using the beta APIs and like, hey, don't do that, right? Please move to the newer ones. So like bringing them along and like, so that is a general challenge I see in both communities.
So,
go ahead, Bob.
Sort of piggybacking on the API thing, actually I'm curious if OpenStack has a similar problem. Lots of people have built abstractions on top of Kubernetes, so all these API versions are getting hidden behind Helm or some of this other stuff. And like one of the biggest issues we had back when is the 1.16 release where we deprecated some APIs, is that there were like 360 Helm charts that people were using that, since they had all abstracted that stuff away, weren't actually like updated, and no one actually realized that it would be a problem until they made that change. They upgrade their cluster, and boom, things aren't working right.
Yeah, I think the API discussion is interesting. It's one of those challenges that we've been working with internally. You know, the strength of things like OpenStack and Kubernetes are open APIs that, you know, can be used to create new things, to automate in ways that, you know, in the past have not been possible. But then you have the challenge of, well, we want to move forward and make new things. At some point, you have to update the APIs. Just recently, Cinder trying to remove the V2 API, and we're sitting here going, well, we think we can do this. And it got to the point where it's like, okay, we're going to remove it and see who screams, because you don't know you don't know who all's out there that's using it under the covers or behind the scenes. So you know, the success is also a pain point.
Noah V3.
It works.
Yep.
It works. People don't want to change.
Yeah, its API is always complex things to change. And in few of the, at some extent, what in OpenStack we try not to delete those old API or interface. We keep them as long as we can. And for example, in Noah case, there are even some proxy APIs still there, which are proxying to Cinder or network or image services. So we, at much as possible, we keep the old APIs also, but we keep improving them during as with the new version and all. But as like Jay mentioned, removing Cinder V2 is not an easy thing. So at some extent, people they get broken and they complain, but there is no other best way from API side, I think. If they are designed ideal as a best at the start, it's good, which I don't think it happens anytime. But we keep improving, and what we actually mainly care is we don't break all the users at the same time. So we do API change with the versioning and keep the old thing as much as possible. But yeah, we still face these API challenge in OpenStack.
Communicate the changes and the upcoming deprecations and removals as best as you can, and hope for the best, I guess. We kind of talked about this a little bit, but do you think that in the future this will all end up being operated by a handful of like hyperscale cloud providers, or is there still a place for orgs to run their own infrastructure? Like, what's missing to make it easier and a more viable option for more organizations to run, so that it doesn't just go to the hyperscalers?
Well, I mean, not everybody can run, in the public cloud or has a need for hyperscale. I'm seeing a lot of customers in the medical industry, banking, those sorts of things where they can't have their infrastructure out in the public cloud. So there is a real need for on-prem infrastructure. We've had kind of a burst to the public cloud, and people are going, wow, that's expensive, or oops, I can't put this data there, and they're having to kind of back up and go, okay, how do I do this internally? And how do I do it without breaking all the automation that I've already done for the public cloud infrastructure? So again, back to APIs, common interfaces, and making as much reusable and portable as possible.
Yeah, we don't have that problem because a lot of the users are already on the public clouds. Again, our challenger is more around like how do we span both public and private clouds, right? And then making sure that people can auto scale between them, like burst, like Jay was saying, and come up with how in other words, how to stitch multiple clusters together, right? Like which are across data centers, across clouds. And that is where we are seeing a lot of work happening right now around what we call the cluster API, where you are treating, like, give me a cluster as an API, and like upgrade this cluster, bring down this other cluster. So we are doing that kind of design right now, and then it's just a matter of time before we'll have at least a few good solutions on how to stitch all these things together. Because in the end of the day, you want to push down policies to say, hey, I need to tighten security on all my clusters. I want to switch this off or switch this on, things like that, right? So you need a way to assemble the clusters together and do the same things across all the different clusters, and being able to programmatically start things when you need them and stop things when you don't, right? So that's where we are seeing the newer work being focused on, which is layering on top of the Kubernetes itself and not necessarily within Kubernetes.
The other thing I was like, for some stuff that sort of is in Kubernetes that, we haven't had good primitives for in the past, was like, clusters didn't have an individual unique identifier. So it was really hard to manage clusters that might be in multiple locations if the cluster itself doesn't have a name. The other one is like multi-cluster services, where, let's say you want to advertise a service that is available in this cluster that, might be on-prem or might be in the cloud to these clusters over here. And none of this stuff, there have been various things that have been built in the past to sort of augment and add those things externally to Kubernetes, but now they're getting sort of baked into more into like the core and made more of the core itself. We're also seeing like other stuff with handling like multi-cluster ingress with the like gateway API, and to be able to route load to multiple clusters behind a single front end.
Lots of things happening.
Yes.
And obviously, lots of API changes, lots of work being done upstream. So I know that both projects, OpenStack and Kubernetes, see massive amounts of activity, like 35,000-ish changes per year. But both seem to struggle with getting basic maintenance sort of things done to core Kubernetes and core OpenStack. How do you explain and kind of solve that problem, if you have a solution?
And no good solutions as such, Kendall. So a lot of people will come to the community and say, hey, I want this, I want that, I want this feature, I want this working differently. This doesn't work for me. I want to change the way it works, right? But then what we are finding is the people who have to keep everything running, day after day, week after week, release after release. That pool is shrinking a little bit in both communities, right? So we have to figure out a way to make sure that we engage the long tail of contributors. Plus, we have to figure out how to we have to balance the two things. And we are far enough down the line, 5 years, 6 years down the line, where the original people are no longer there, and the design decisions that were taken and the code that was written is bit rotting, and we have to train the new people to get to the point where they feel comfortable touching and making changes and thinking through the same kind of. If we set things up like discovery, writing things down and making sure that we have enough test cases and general healthy open source practices, getting that kind of thing set up for the maintainers who are coming in, that would be the right thing to do, I feel.
Yeah, that's definitely a good start for us. One of the things that, and I think both projects have this problem, I'll speak more to Kubernetes, is these days it is a lot harder to get a feature or anything that you want merged in there. And like it or not, it's now in a production place, and we've done a lot to ensure that any code that is merged in is production ready. We have a process, the productionist readiness review, that reviews all sorts of features as they come in. And this adds complexity to getting those newer contributors in there. And one thing that sort of Kubernetes has done is like much more of the work is now being shifted outside of core, where it is easier to get more people involved. But that's still like, there's still challenges even with that, and getting the work out to a place where it can be worked on easier.
So just to add on to what Bob was saying, so when somebody comes to us with a big feature, we ask, like, tell us the smallest amount of change that can be done within Kubernetes, where we can call out to the things that you want to call out when you want to call out, instead of like putting the whole feature in. How do we enable you to build on top of Kubernetes outside of Kubernetes? So over a period of time, if there is really a huge demand from a lot of people, then we can move it into the core, right? So if you see, so we ended up with this approach, and we've been doing it for a few years. Now, if you look at the list of projects in CNCF that build on top of Kubernetes, you can see the explosion there, right? Like there is people doing all kinds of stuff. And OPA, Envoy, Gateway, you name it. There is like projects doing things on top of Kubernetes, built on the primitives and the extension points that we have within Kubernetes, right? So this is good and bad, because what is ending up happening is the people who were earlier working on Kubernetes core are doing things outside, and they have lesser time for the core, right? So we are enabling the ecosystem to expand like crazy, but then we are paying a little bit of a price in terms of like losing some of their time.
Yeah, that's true. And even in OpenStack also, as Bob mentioned, so getting the features done is not the same way it used to be, because there are a lot of contributors is one of the aspect, but about their long-term maintenance is also the key. If a single feature is specific to a single use case, which can be solved in a different way, we try to tell them. And in OpenStack, if you see, we have a process of discussing the design first. Mm-hmm. And as part of the design, we discuss what is the use case of that feature. And if we do have any alternate, we tell them. And if still the proposal is good as a use case for other companies, other deployment also, we keep accepting that. But yes, it takes larger time than it used to be. And I think we don't have like perfect solution as a community, but I think the companies like using open source, either Kubernetes or OpenStack, they should come up and adding more contributors to this core maintenance, or even the infra setup for these communities. And I feel like we should communicate to those companies, convince them. How to do that is another challenge, but that's the one way I think we should start or continue doing that.
I think it's interesting because in OpenStack, I've been around it for a while now. We won't say how long, but we went through everybody's got to get their new feature in. It was chaos, and all of this, is it the right feature? My company wants this, my company wants that, and now it is a little sad to me, to be honest, to see how that we've gotten to a point where the fact that people keep asking, is it dead, shows that the view that the world has of it is wrong. It's not dead. There are a lot of people using it, and there are still a lot of really interesting challenges to solve. There's more to development, I think, than just making something new. There's a challenge that people need to see in making what everybody is using stable and continuing to grow it from that aspect. And I would love to see, more excitement from the community and the companies of the world that depend on this to continue to help out and solve some of these tough questions going forward as to, what are the edge cases that we've never figured out? What breaks the gate sometimes, that there's got to be customers seeing it too. It's just, they're not coming back and saying, hey, I saw this and I want to help fix it.
Yeah.
For Kubernetes, sorry.
Oh, go for it.
For Kubernetes, we have this concept of KEP, a Kubernetes enhancement proposal, that sort of like outlines, like I sort of touched on it a bit when I was talking about the production readiness review a few minutes ago, but it is essentially a design proposal that outlines like all the work that is needed for a feature, and they tend to go through very lengthy review processes by like the owning SIG, the group that is like the core maintainer for it. They'll loop in any sort of other ancillary SIGs that might have thoughts on the design of it. And we have this sort of, this entire process of them going in sort of alpha, beta to stable. And in alpha, when it is first put out, it's not turned on by default, but it is enabled in a cluster. It is there for end users to, flip on and experiment with and give us feedback. Speaking of which, we don't get enough feedback. If you want to get involved, please give us feedback. Please turn on alpha features and give us feedback. We need it. But from this alpha to beta phase, like, the API can change. It's the where we can make big changes. And sometimes there'll be multiple alpha APIs. And it's the same thing when we go to beta. Beta is where it's like it actually gets enabled by default in a cluster. And at that point we have at least enable there's some guarantees around it. Like it's not likely that the API will change significantly if it goes from beta to GA. So I don't want to say it's safe for people to use, but like they can start to use it.
Wait, you just said you wanted them to use it in alpha.
I want beta is when it's turned on by default. Alpha is when we can make the most radical changes to the API. Like if this is awful, why are we doing it this way? We'll toss it out and release a new alpha, which has happened. Oh god, it wasn't endpoint slice. I don't remember. There was one that was just completely tossed out after the things were just awful in alpha. But that early feedback is really needed. And with all this, the graduation from alpha to beta to GA can only happen once per release. So when it comes to a feature going from alpha to production, it is a minimum at this point of a year. It cannot go faster. It takes a year of consistent development to go from alpha to GA, and that is the fastest it can possibly go. There isn't a way to really bypass that. We do that specifically on purpose to make sure whatever does make it a GA is thoroughly tested, is thoroughly stable, has all our needs to potentially give people a feature flag to turn it off. And as well as we recently had to make sure that everything has the right ways. This is from the production readiness review to measure and get all the metrics from the potential thing that was being introduced.
Yeah, in OpenStack, even we had the concept of experimental things to deliver, especially on API. But the challenge we faced is people started using in their production, and when we changed it, they started complaining. So we stopped the concept of this experimental thing. But just one question during the alpha to beta or GA transition: is there any feature happened you didn't get feedback, or you got the negative feedback and you removed it completely?
Oh, we have a bunch of those. For example, we are completely redesigning what we call pod security policy because at beta, it was stuck in beta for the longest time and it wasn't making progress. And we saw so many problems with it. We were like, nah, we're going to get rid of it. And we on it.
Back to square one.
Yeah.
I will say so many users were interested in that feature that a replacement is sort of being developed that doesn't necessarily do everything that PSPs, pod security policies, did, but does cover a majority of the use cases in a much more maintainable fashion.
And while this was happening, I should tell you that there were at least 3 other open source projects which came to the same space, and they said, whatever PSPs can do, you can do with our projects, right? Like so QNO and OPA Gateway, and at least there was one more project. So we were so happy, like folks, go use one of those projects and leave this beta alone, right? But we still needed something simpler in the base, so we are ending up starting the process of a new feature which will do some of the things that PSP does, but then 80% of the cases, and then 20% of the cases, we say go use this other projects that are built on top of Kubernetes.
Yeah, seems like a really good way to organize things. Like cover the majority in a smaller amount, and then like the special flower sort of use cases can exist or be served by other projects better. Cool. So we've again kind of covered this a little bit, but what are some of the like biggest focuses and struggles now for both the Kubernetes and OpenStack communities now that both are past the hype curves and moving to the land of more mature but still very active open source projects? Bob, did you want to go first?
Yeah, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. So Kubernetes has, like, the rate in which new contributors are coming in has dropped significantly over the past 2 years. And this is sort of, again, getting a little bit over the hype curve, the difficulty in which it is to contribute to the project. There are sort of a lot of little issues, but the thing is like all the SIGs, all these groups still have just like massive amounts of work that need to get done. And one of the strategies that steering has taken recently is the whole idea of the annual report. We are asking all our SIGs, all our groups to sort of report out, what they've done for the past year, where they need help. This is not necessarily to look at hey, you're not doing this. This is for them to raise the flag of, hey, we need help here. So we published a summary of those annual reports recently. I can drop a link. Yes, thank you. Whoever is copying that out of the doc. And something that people, if you are interested in Kubernetes and helping, that would be a great place to start. I think where we struggle the most, though, is the unseen work, not the feature work, the stuff that's hard to incentivize. So this is like our testing and infra groups. They are our core operational stuff, for Kubernetes, it's like SIG testing and the Kate's infra working group that are just making sure that all the lights stay on and we can continue to test and do everything that's needed in a Kubernetes release. Sorry, excuse me. Would you say that's about right, Dims?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of common struggles. OpenStack being a half a step more mature, I guess, on some levels, or maybe just been around for a little bit longer, maybe not more mature per se. But I expect that there's a lot of advice that the OpenStack community can give to the Kubernetes community, because we've been through a lot of the struggles just 6, 12, 18 months before you. So Ghanshyam or Jay, do you want to maybe talk about some of our solutions to their problems?
Yeah, one of the thing is in OpenStack we faced, as we talked about a little bit before also, the basic maintenance and keeping up the infrastructure to build the software. And the thing here is currently we need more maintainer in OpenStack for infrastructure, keep up the infrastructure services, which we need day-to-day activity for developing the software. And the challenge is because those services or maintaining of those services are not directly at the production stage. Things companies doesn't realize what are the benefit of those. They just think okay, we get the OpenStack release, we can upgrade it, we can use it. But how we are developing the software there and what all basic things we need there. So that is one of the key thing. And we don't have a solution, but the advice I would like to give is we should have some framework in open source to have those maintainer or resources keep up, which are required for the day-to-day activity or for infrastructures. How we do that, either we ask like say foundation, or we ask companies to support those things. So that is something if like in Kubernetes you can start thinking about now, that can be helpful for if you're facing future issues in future. Because currently in OpenStack we are in one example is we are in critical help for ELK services maintenance, elastic recheck and logging, which is very must for our day-to-day debugging the issues and all. So
Yeah,
by the time you reach at that stage with the critical help, I think you should encourage more companies to give you the maintainer and resources.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you remembered or mentioned the elastic recheck, that part. Definitely for community members and companies who may have infrastructure to help the OpenStack community with, that would be an opportunity there. If you don't have coders to help contribute, there are other ways that you can help open source communities through providing physical resources to help with that. There's also there's a upstream investment opportunities list that's publicly available as part of the out on the web for OpenStack, that if you're looking for ways to get involved with the community in places where we can really make you or your developers can make a difference, that's a good place to start. And just, it's a community. Get out with the people like, Dims and Bob and Gmann and I, and say, what can I do to help? We're always happy to talk about that and help bring people to get them started. One question for Dims and Bobby here. Have you seen, I know Dims, you were involved early in the OpenStack project. Has the onboarding and bringing new members into the community been different as you have people who've gone from one open source community to another?
So we are trying new things, different things. And, for example, we have some country-specific channels in dev, for example, for folks from India, and CNDev for folks from China, where we try to organize their time zone specific activities and try to get them into make first, there are some issues where people who are just getting into the projects can help out. So throw out those kind of issues so people can snatch them up. Then we are also trying, we've done this with OpenStack, but we are also doing with at CNCFS, like mentorship programs, Outreachy, LFX, and GSOC, and those kinds of things. So there are some things that we've already done here that we are trying to replicate there, and there are some additional stuff that we are also doing. The problem here is the learning curve, right? It takes a while for people to get comfortable and feel that they are productive, and getting somebody to that point is the hard task. And one of the things that we are thinking is the funnel has to be big, and then over a period of time, and based on whether they're getting more good mentors and things like that, by the time a year is out or 2 years are out, only a few of those remain, right? So you have to have a constant set of people that we are trying to target and try to get them into various things, various initiatives and working groups and things like that, and over a period of time, see who sticks, right? So building up the leadership and making sure that we have a contributor ladder that people can aspire to, those are the kind of things that we are trying to do as well.
I think one nice thing that I have seen in the community was originally there was that question of what are you doing work for? What is this open source thing? And having to go to your management and explain it. I think that's one barrier that over time has been removed a little bit. At least it's been. I don't get questions from management anymore. Why are you taking an hour to go sit and talk on a video stream, or those sorts of things. So that's one good improvement I have seen over time.
So on the management and the PM side, like on from the vendors or other contributors, the problem is they don't want to engage too early because they think that things are not ready. And then by the time they engage, they realize that, oh, this doesn't work for us, so we'll go do something else, right? So so we have to point out that paradox to them, saying you have to be there, you have to pay in, and you have to pay attention to what is happening, and only then you can reap the benefits better, right? So
yeah,
that is a bit of coaching that we have to try to do for the folks that are not directly involved in day-to-day activities, but they are the ones who sign the checks, so to say, for the people who are contributing. So there is some amount of things that we need to do on that side, and it's a hard thing.
Yeah, that came up for. Yeah, Ajay, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ghanshyam.
I was thinking the same thing came up for when OpenStack tried to add the help needed thing, which is now the upstream opportunity things. So the very first question was how we explain to the executives what's the benefit. So what we tried to add the business values for each of the items where we are asking help for, so that members or developer can explain it to their managers or executives what as a business it can add the value. It's not just I want to do the coding and I want to go there. It's something you also get. So that's something you can explain.
So one of the recent things that we are trying to do is add more roles in the SIGs, not just chairs and TLs, but also other roles where the role is defined, what the person doing the role is going to do. So people coming in and say, hey, I want to do that role, or I want to do what Bob is saying, right? So having that kind of a thing will tell people that, hey, okay, this is a 3-month thing. I am sure I can talk my manager into it, right? But if it's not specified and it's open-ended, then it becomes very difficult. For example, we have a good mentoring program in the release team where everything is written down, CI signal, and how to push the button to cut a release. And we've written it down, and we say that, look, this is a 3-month rotation, and there'll be a mentor. You can shadow them. There can be multiple shadows, and next time you can step up as a lead. Right, so they know exactly what to expect, and they know what is expected out of you. And there is a checklist and a rule book that tells them, what to expect and what to do. So it becomes easier for getting them. We have to make friends, right? You make friends, then you end up doing more things with them. So that part is the one, No,
I think the short-term duration role you mentioned, I think, is really a good idea, and that's how more and more people can help within the short time, instead of asking okay, I want to contribute here as a full time for a full year. So
right,
that's good.
Yeah, and it tells them, okay, I have a set of people that I can go talk to. These are the shadows, these are the mentors that I can talk to, and I build a friendship with them, and then I go do things. Over a period of time, you expand the number of people that you know, and you get to know more of the problems that are there in the community and where you can help, and you naturally end up doing more things. At least that's the theory. So hopefully.
Yeah, can confirm I wear a lot of different hats in my community, OpenStack primarily, but also now Kubernetes. I've gotten involved in more places. The more people you know, the more work you have to do. That's definitely
is open source built by the people that show up.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
But the more awesome people you meet, so that's good too.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So we did get one question from the audience, another one now. How is OpenStack and how is Kubernetes dealing with the CentOS to Linux change? Could this be an opportunity to build an out-of-the-box stack?
at least for Kubernetes, that we don't care about that. We distribute binaries.
Easy peasy for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as there is C group V1 and C group V or C group V2,
Yeah.
we are happy. So the way it works is we depend on runtime like containerd or cryo, and then that depends on runc. So a lot of the things on how containers run is abstracted from us. So we don't have to worry too much about what is happening in the underlying layer, but it's more of a problem for OpenStack where everything is dependent exactly on what you're running on.
Yeah. So there was another question asking if Kubernetes supported or was supported on Rocky Linux. That would be a no then, or yes, because like you're abstracted away from it.
I'm sure there are people who have run
Yeah.
it on Rocky Linux. If not, that'll be a good thing for somebody to try.
Yeah. And come
Even
back with
that-
feedback.
That came up in OpenStack also on mailing list. If we do run OpenStack on Rocky Linux, or is there any testing done? But yeah, we don't do it upstream currently, but we said like if anyone is running or testing, feel free to add the documentation or contribute it back. What you're testing, what are the results?
Awesome. Yeah. So we're kind of getting to the end of like the questions we had. But how can our two communities continue to work together moving forward?
Yeah, I think we already started since 1 or 2 years back. So we have the events. Previously, it used to be physical events, now virtually, and there's like live streaming here. So, for example, in OpenStack PTZ or steering committee meetings, people goes from one community to other, like especially the TC and steering committee, but it's open for other member also. So I think we continue discussing and continue meeting with each other in the events. That will be, I think, a great way to share the ideas. What are the challenges Kubernetes facing, how they solved it, or what OpenStack faced, or how we solved it, or not yet solved. So those cross mind and cross communities collaboration in the events, I think, is the good way. Even in OpenStack, we have next PTZ schedule in October, so that will be very good place and very welcome for Kubernetes steering committee to join us.
Yeah.
So a thought on working together for the future, and this is as somebody who works closely with telcos, trying to figure out the edge. OpenStack has had Edge working group for a while now. We're still trying to figure out what Edge is. Would like to know thoughts from Dims and Bobby. Where's Kubernetes going with the Edge plays?
So the VNFs at the CNCF level, there is a working group that is trying to do CNF, which is container-based equivalent. Yep. And the way it works is we have working groups at the CNCF level. We have working groups at the Kubernetes level. At this point, the pen is with the people who are doing the CNFs, and they are collecting like best practices and things like that. And they are trying to come up with like a conformance thing and like guidance documents and things like that. So that what we end up doing is like, if there are things that are not implemented or that needs to be implemented, like features or whatever, then that comes down to either SIG networking or SIG node or something like that, and that gets translated into KEPs, and that's how we end up working on it. Yep. So we have a process for that, but so far we haven't seen. It feels like they are off on their own and they are okay right now. So we have to go poke them and see if they need anything more from us. On the edge side itself, when we're talking about one kind of edge would be like smaller devices, right?
Yep.
So
yep.
For that, there are a few projects that are there already in the Kubernetes ecosystem. There's K3s, there is K0s, and there is KubeEdge, and so there is active research and experimentation and things going on in that space. Now the question would be like, how do you bridge the edge devices with a bigger cluster, right? And that is, we haven't really started too much down that path yet, but I am sure we'll end up looking at that scenario as well.
That touches on all the multi-cluster stuff that's going on right now. Like,
exactly,
it's all sort of like collectively edging, going that way eventually.
Yeah, I think the kind of what I think would be interesting looking to the future is we're going to have an explosion of infrastructure that needs to be managed with IoT devices and things like that. And Kubernetes is well placed for running small little workloads at the edge, and looking at ways that we can combine the infrastructure management through Ironic, et cetera, that we have there to get the environment up and running while Kubernetes manages the workload on top of it. I think there are definitely opportunities in the future to work together on those sorts of opportunities. So, yeah, I'll give you a call, Dims.
absolutely.
See, make friends, get more work.
Make friends, get more work.
I know you did it for a long time.
Rekindle old friendships, get more work.
Get more work.
More work.
I'm going with the theme here.
Yeah, exactly. So we've had a couple more questions come in from the audience. It's CNCF projects combine Kubernetes, KubeVirt, and CAPI somehow confuse us on decision-making when choosing between OpenStack and Kubernetes. So what are your suggestions or a checklist to answer on which way to go?
So typically what I end up answering here, this is experiment, try it out. You can't jump into production like next week, even if I give you a checklist, because your situation is unique, your use case is unique, and some of the things that KubeVirt offers might not be enough for your existing image to be booted up in KubeVirt, for example, right? So yeah, cluster API is slightly different. So you would end up, the question is probably like, do I use OpenStack to run my VM, or do I use KubeVirt to run my VM, right? So I would say, try both. Both have their positives and negatives. And the thing with the KubeVirt is, if you have a mixed environment already, then it is better to do that. So for example, if you are doing a lot of things in containers, but you have this one thing that refuses to budge, and then you use something like KubeVirt. And if you are primarily based on virtual machines and you want to add Kubernetes on top, then there's a different set of things that you can think of.
Yep.
Yeah, even KubeVirt thing, like recently, my company, we tried testing the KubeVirt and how stable and this thing are. So one of the things we noticed that in terms of the scaling, like if you are building a large cloud or something, you need a lot of high workload. So OpenStack is where you can achieve a little bit more than what KubeVirt you do with a small cluster and all. Even though, like as Tim said, it's experimental and it can be improved with the feedback. But yeah, it's a different use case and how you use it. So that mainly depends.
Awesome. Thank you for all the information. Hopefully we helped them out. So there's one more kind of about use case specific things. They ask, we use Ironic for bare metal provisioning. Any thoughts on similar projects for Kubernetes? Is MetalCube stable for general purpose use? Any other similar projects on the roadmap?
I think it's MetalCube, Tinkerbell.
There's like a dozen of them.
Yeah. I haven't kicked the tires there, and I know Ironic has been there for a while. But we have Ava with us now, so anyway, that's an inside joke. But yeah, you have to look at the list of features in all three, and you have to do the comparison. But the basic technologies all three use are probably going to be the same at the base level, right? So it's more of like what you're comfortable with, what you know already. Like if you're comfortable with Python, and you foresee a bunch of small things that you end up fixing in Ironic, then maybe you should just do Ironic, right? So
yeah, makes sense. Stay with what you're familiar with, or what sort of community you fit in better with, where your use cases lie, a little bit more closely aligned with those that are being focused on, and that sort of thing.
For everything, there is a learning curve, right? So, and start with your comfort zone and like grow the teams around the technologies and the communities that you want to be with.
Yeah. You can also de-risk, if you're concerned about any of those projects, you can de-risk your investment in those projects by actually contributing back to them.
Ah, yes.
Ooh.
Good pro tip right there. That's applicable outside of Kubernetes and OpenStack too. All open source projects could use more friends to help take on all of the work that a finite number of us are doing.
If your company depends on it, it's a good idea to have someone in there that knows what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The key there is don't start an open source project, without looking at all the existing ones, and maybe it's not worth it, right?
Yeah, your problem may already be solved, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel again.
Yeah.
Just add the maintainer to existing one. Don't just use it freely.
Exactly. Yeah. Get involved. That's definitely the moral of the story here.
Yes.
Being involved is really the best way to go.
Yes.
So as far as, moving forward, getting involved in either the Kubernetes community or the OpenStack community, or if you want to keep participating in our joint discussions between the Kubernetes Steering Committee and the OpenStack TC, the Technical Committee, we kind of coordinate, Ghanshyam mentioned this a little bit, on a somewhat ad hoc basis to meet either at the public steering committee meetings that are organized in the steering committee channel on the Kubernetes Slack. And if we're happen to be organizing an upcoming PTG, which we are currently, that will be set for October of this year. We will also be inviting the Kubernetes Steering Committee to come hang out with us at the OpenStack PTG. And we'll coordinate those conversations likely on IRC in our OpenStack-TC channel. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of our awesome open source governance representatives today from both communities. Thank you, Dims, Bob, Jay, Ghanshyam. We really, really appreciate you having you here today, sharing your knowledge and opinions and everything. Our next episode around ironically enough, airs in 2 weeks on August 12th. But don't forget that in the meantime, you can watch all of our previous episodes that we have aired on OpenInfra Live or OpenInfra.live in the meantime. Also, if you have an idea for a future episode, we definitely want to hear from you. You can submit your proposals at ideas.openinfralive.live. Geez, there's so many more periods than I keep wanting to include. So there you go. There is the URL there. Mark your calendars for Thursday, August 12th at 14 UTC to join us for our next episode. Thank you all, and see you next time on OpenInfra Live.
Thanks a lot, Kendall, for running
Thanks.
this.
Yep.
Thanks, Kendall.
This was great.
Thanks, guys.